Hi everyone, a fantastic guest for a conversation just coming up, but before we sit down together for all of that, I just want to remind you all about the importance of my patreon.com site. Go there, go to patreon.com, sign up, part with a bit of cash, and you'll be supporting the channel, enabling all of it to happen. And of course, the quid pro quo is you get early access to everything that Paul and I do here. New footage, question and answer sessions, competitions, the works. So get along there, patreon.com, look for me by name, join up, and I will look forward to seeing you there as a member of the family. Okay, back to the meat of the matter, this week's interview. Hello and welcome all. It's time for another conversation from which hopefully we all learn something, myself definitely included, because as I've said on here before, I have realised, admittedly recently, that even at my age I still have a great deal to learn, and I'm keen to do so. So my suggestion is that we all walk side by side and take another step or two together along the way to something better. So today, I welcome the return of Will Keyte, who is an expert on the Constitution. Will and I have spoken together on here before, and we've spoken a lot in the real world also. But I think, and Will agrees, that the upcoming general election provides an important opportunity or a test case or a context within which to be reminded, yet again, of the underlying unlawfulness in the behaviour of those determined to lead, or really rather to control us. Hello, Will Keyte.
Hello, Neil. Great to be back on. Thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to this, Will. Now, I've been reading material that you've been putting out there in recent days and weeks, and we can link to all of it on here for those with a mind to follow up the chat with some useful reading, some useful homework. And in that material, you make plain that the run-up to the general election shows us once again some of the nature of the challenge that we face. I wonder if you could elaborate on that thought.
Yes. No, thank you, Neil. It's great to be back on again. And we had a fantastic conversation the last time. We got into some quite interesting things, and but you're right. Yeah, we've got this huge distraction once again or a circus, if you like, perhaps political circus. The problem that we've got, of course, is that what we've now got, and I was explaining that the last time, is that within the last 300 years or so, our kind of governing system, if you like, has become this sort of political spectrum, this party political system. And it really only has been that long. And of course, what that's doing is it's distracting us away from our lives, from real governance, which should be about morality and justice. And what we have now is a system that is directing a huge amount of policy backed up by a very firm and hugely wide-ranging and prevalent body of legislation to go with it, and that's the issue that we now have, and we're invited to take part in selecting which package we would like of these things that we know will effectively ride roughshod over the free will of many people, the minority, which could be quite large, and it fundamentally should not be operating like that. It's unconstitutional. But that said, we're in it. So how can we make the best of that? And I think that's what you're driving at. And we could introduce that straight away as what could we do? It would be good in a little bit to get back into what the expressions are of the kind of society that we are now experiencing versus the kind of society that we would gain if we were to get back to what we should have. And so we can get into that. But right now, it's about getting people to understand around us that we have to get back to an individualist society, one that is more authentic with the Constitution. Now, how do we do that in the current system? It's through education. I feel actually that the independent candidates probably are the ones that are best positioned to do that, because they haven't got the party political or the party system behind them that is distracting them and putting weight on them to go in certain policy directions. So independence, I think, would be interesting, because that's a way of getting into the political system and maybe getting them interested in raising the profile, if you like, of this constitutional law information that I've been putting out. And I have indeed been having some of those conversations with independent candidates, some really interesting ones, actually. So, yeah, in short, that's probably the best way I see at the moment.
I obviously pay attention to the feedback and the comments that follow these conversations. And when I looked at the feedback to our previous chat, I was very encouraged by the number of people who were prepared to acknowledge that it's a complicated topic.
Yes,
I think we have around us generally. I think we're all a bit guilty of wanting to resist complexity.
Yep.
Yeah, I suppose it's a bit like if you sit down for your maths exam. When you turn over the page, the question paper, you don't want to see simultaneous equations. You just want to see what's the answer to 2 plus 2. Complexity is discouraging. But I was really, really engaged and enthused by how many people had listened to the whole conversation, even though going into it makes your head spin.
Yes.
And you have to just relax, take a breath, and realize that this is difficult and challenging material. There's no two ways about it. And that's why when you say that we need education, one of those steps along the way that I mentioned in the introduction is knowing that, just relaxing into the understanding that this is not going to be fixed overnight, no matter what any here today, gone tomorrow politician might promise.
Totally
I can fix all of this by... No, you can't.
Yeah. Yes, no, absolutely right. And remember that one of the reasons for that is that because of our own contradictory nature, we're sort of calling for government to do things for us, whilst at the same time many people saying, what the hell are the government doing, and what, and that creates these massive conflicts which we don't even spot happening. So, for example, there was a good example of this that I was sort of talking to somebody about recently, about this tendency for towns and cities to put in place zones to prevent certain vehicle types from entering that, and if you do, you get a massive fine and all of this sort of stuff, And people forget sometimes, of course, that those policies come about because the residents of that town or that city might not actually want huge amounts of traffic from elsewhere in the country just using their internal roads of their city or town. And this, of course, is where things like pedestrianisation comes from, and who decided that we all drive on the left side of the road? And, this is the kind of stuff that gets very difficult and very complicated because on the one hand, we're clamouring for things to be sorted centrally from the centre. And yet at the same time, we also see the problems very readily. Of what that brings to us, which is a prevention of latitude and liberty within society. So we're kind of doing it to ourselves. Those are the dynamics that I was talking about. That, come on, you need to wake up and realize that on the one hand, you're giving government power, and yet on the other hand, you're wanting to take it away again. So there's this kind of double think that's going on in enormous numbers of people, even people who you might consider to be freedom lovers and freedom fighters, and they're doing it all the time to themselves in a way without actually spotting it. So what I'm trying to do is to break this down into foundational principles so that we can start to spot where it is by mistake we start to fall into those traps, right? And that's one of the reasons last time why I brought up that concept or of the two opposing ideologies of individualism and collectivism. Yeah, so the individualism is the belief and the foundational set of principles that form your ideology about how you live with individual rights, and that's very much in is compatible with natural justice and the Constitution. It's how we should be operating. Not only that, is that it's in alignment with nature and the universe, right? But what we've now become is this collectivist society, which is where we're kind of driving policy from the centre, knowing perfectly well that the choice of that package of measures is going to ride roughshod over a potential minority. And as you said, that could be 49% of the country. You can't operate like that, and that's going to mean, some pretty radical changes. But what might be useful, if you want, is to go into some of those expressions at a sort of a more surface level as to what those two different ideologies look like, so that people can start to see how it is that we fall into those traps. Collectivist would be, we must force people to do what we think they should do. Now, that might come from a good place, because they are too dumb to do it on their own. Now, I'm quoting G. Edward Griffin here. We, on the other hand, have been to school. We've read books. We are informed. We are smarter than those people out there. If we leave it to them, they are going to make terrible mistakes. So it is up to us, the enlightened ones. We shall decide on behalf of society, and we shall enforce our decisions by law, so no one has any choice. That we should rule in this fashion is our obligation to mankind. That's a sort of framing or thinking that a collectivist might think, and it will vary according to sort of, on one end of the extreme, maliciousness. The other end of the extreme will be quite well-meaning, just falling into the trap that I've got a really good idea for social organisation, and I want to instigate it, and by God, I'm bloody well going to do it as well. So the individualist, however, would think, we also think we are right, and that the masses seldom do what we think they should do, but we don't believe in forcing anyone to comply with our will, because if we grant that principle, then others, representing larger groups than our own, could compel us to act as they decree, and that would be the end of our freedom, or freedom in general, in fact. So I'm actually quoting something there from G. Edward Griffin, who I would recommend looking up, because he frames this individualism and collectivism just absolutely beautifully. But yeah, that's just a little sort of plain English start of the expression, or the impulse, if you like, of those two opposing ideologies.
What are some of the difficult realizations, or what are some of the difficult and challenging consequences that a community would have to face up to and make peace with if we were to go down that path that champions individualism,
yes,
at all times, against collectivism? What I think, you've said to me in private, that, for example, something like a national health service,
right,
as we've been raised to understand it, is antithetical.
You can't have it. You see, that's exactly it. Because if you like the idea of individualism, which is, my rights end where yours begin, another way of perhaps looking at it is stop interfering in other people's lives. Just leave me alone. Yeah, that would be the principle of individualism. Now, if you do that, it ultimately, if you extrapolate that, ultimately, it means that you can't socially organize. It means that you can't put in place some kind of a project that involves other people, whether they like it or not. You can't do that. And not only that, of course, is that you certainly can't force money from them as well, which is the result of the product of their hard work and labor and all the rest of it. You can't force that out of people. You have no moral authority to do so. If you can't do that with two people on a desert island, then you can't do that on the scale either of a society too. That means that you can't have tax as well. So you start to extrapolate these quite serious conclusions from it. And of course, what that brings you to the understanding is that our society fundamentally is functioning as a collectivist society. And in order for us to start to well, in order for us to stop feeling the pain of being in conflict with the universe, there is a prerequisite, as I said last time, for returning back to an individualist society. You actually don't have a choice in that regard. It is compulsory. And you can leave it as it is and allow it to get worse, if you like. But that will necessarily result in a continuation of the pain, and a lack of latitude and liberty, an increase in control. Because those are the unfolding dynamics that are at play. They're kind of self-destructive patterns that we necessarily bring upon ourselves. So these are quite far-reaching consequences, and you're not going to fix that quickly. And I'm not suggesting for a moment that either we should, or secondly, that I have all the answers in detail as to how we construct our society in that regard. We don't have those answers at the moment. But the problem is that we've developed it like that incrementally over a very long period of time. And
what would a society look? What would a society look like, for example, if we didn't have a collectivist health care, and I suppose by extension, if we didn't have a collectivist education system for children? And all of the rest of the things that become policy decisions that are made at the top or made at the centre and that cascade down, and that you don't, as individuals, we don't get a choice in the matter. It's a one size fits all solution. So, however far in the future it might lie, and however much education and self-realisation might be required for everyone along the way, what would that society of individuals perhaps look like in relation to health, in relation to education, and the rest?
Yeah, and it would be incredibly different. So for a start, I suspect that society structurally would be much more broken up, as of course it was, in fact, in the time when the Constitution was functioning more authentically. In the late Saxon period, for example, the countries were much smaller. Everything was divided up into much smaller pieces. There was less administration to be done from a central place. And because of that, it means that you've got oversight much more straightforwardly. Obviously, the distances were much they appeared much bigger for people, obviously, because they didn't have the transport and the communication and technology that we have now. So those smaller distances would have still felt quite big for them. But nevertheless, we would be looking at smaller communities, so that oversight could then be could then be achieved, if you like. And it's not only oversight, it's accountability as well. So anyone who is actually managing things on behalf of the community, or, they've been, and because you would have elections, as I said last time, but remember that elections or adult suffrage is only there to bring people into public office. That's how it's supposed to operate. It's not necessarily to implement policy in such a way that it would then breach people's free will. And it's going to be much easier to achieve that on a much smaller scale, much more locally. And I'm not saying you're not going to have those challenges. You're always going to have those challenges of how do we deal with our shared spaces and our shared assets. And I'm certainly not claiming that I have all the answers, but I do certainly think that a society of greater accountability is going to be achieved by something much more local and much more oversight. Definitely.
I suppose a lot of people listening to this might, when you talk about smaller and more community based, for a lot of people that would raise the alarm bells of the infamous 15-minute cities that are being proposed.
Yes.
That and again, I for one, have profound problems with the idea of being physically restricted in the way that is implied by 50-minute cities. But I'm supposing that as long as all of it is people operating independently of imposed control from above,
right? Exactly.
Then it doesn't have the dictatorial ghettoizing implications.
Yes. Absolutely, it's a voluntary society that chooses to govern itself and run itself locally, as close to the individual as you possibly can. Because in doing that, you're removing that potential problem of creating policy that is then going to become a shared problem, if you like, for the entire society. Whereas actually, if you're trying to it's too blunt an instrument. Yeah, that's the whole point, is that you're trying to bring it back as close to the individual as you possibly can.
I've been talking publicly recently about my feeling, and you alluded to it earlier, that the party system is a manifestation of the problem.
Yeah.
Of that collectivist thinking. That I track it, but I think you said 300 years. You mentioned the figure of 300 years. I think about 150 odd years ago, around the time of, I don't know, Benjamin Disraeli, Joseph Chamberlain, and others, that the caucus party affiliation, party system seemed to crystallise.
Yes.
For the first time in a way that we would recognise. And I would say that in that moment, when elected representatives were no longer able to act on their conscience or to act in response to their own electorate, that was the death of freedom and choice and individualism in many ways. Do you point the finger at that party system as well? It's not the only problem, but a big visible manifestation of the problem.
Yes. Oh, totally. Yes. I mean, it was the sort of mid-1700s that the Tories and Whigs that sort of came about, wasn't it? But you're absolutely right. You know, because what that collectivist system, the resulting party political system, if you like, it gives power to Parliament, and so this is kind of hand in hand with the power of Parliament, essentially, and it sounds on the surface, if you like, quite reasonable and good, because of course we get to vote in our representatives, but unfortunately that's all it is a representation. It's not actual rulership by the people, because remember that the etymology of the word democracy is the people rule. Well, you don't actually rule by just simply having a few people representing you through some sort of shared package of measures that some of you have voted for, and you know. But yes, it's quite a recent thing. You're absolutely right, and it's come about, and it's a complex thing, isn't it? It's come about through a number of things. It's our incremental outsourcing of our aspects of our life, wanting to, that impulse, if you like, of there needs to be a law against that, or government needs to sort that out. You know, there's been a lot of that. But also, let's not pretend, of course, that there aren't people behind the scenes who might actually quite like that as well. People with that sort of impulse, if you like, who fit into that pattern of thinking, if you like. Collectivists themselves, who would even probably admit that they're collectivists, are people who are running things behind the scenes in such a way that they actually want to pave the way and facilitate that direction of the way things are going. And I think that we can all point to organisations that are sort of not necessarily completely hidden, some of them semi-hidden, particularly around the end of the 19th century, the latter half of the 19th century. We're talking in America of organisations like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Carnegie Foundation, the Guggenheim Foundation, all these foundations. We're all about driving certain perceptions of society, so that those behaviours can be changed. And once again, we fall for it because we're not absolutely acting with consciousness, and we're easy to manipulate because we're not spotting this stuff in us. Over here in the UK, that would have been organisations like the Fabian Society, the Society of the Elect, Lord Alfred Milner's Kindergarten, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which is known as Chatham House. These are organisations that are sort of semi-hidden, that certain people would perhaps rather you didn't know about. But they are collectivists. They are driving things in that direction, and there is a mix of people on there who might be one or two that are absolutely rubbing their hands in this sort of malicious way that I always joke about. Yeah, there will be some, but many of them actually probably are just simply doing it because they genuinely feel that they've got the answers in how to organise society. And of course, that's how an awful lot of destruction comes about, is people absolutely convinced of the merits of their own ideas and plans for organising society. It's a horrible thing. Yeah.
It's very interesting. It's beyond interesting to me at the moment, the way in which it would appear that the pressure cooker environment of the lid on the pot that is, collectivism and top down and one size fits all thinking,
Yeah.
is manifesting itself all across the world at the moment. Look at what's happened in Europe with the European elections, and the response to that from the people seems to have been, the rise of what they're calling, what's being called the red wave.
Yes.
Red in the American Republican sense, rather than our association in the UK with red and socialism.
Yeah.
This rise in Europe of people that are saying, populists who are saying, no, we've had enough of this collectivism. We've had enough of what's being imposed upon us. And of course, on the other side of the Atlantic,
Yes.
in the USA,
Yeah.
that it absolutely feels that the inversion of natural law, the inversion of the way that you and I might think the universe wants things to be, is coming to a head.
Yes.
I know that you're a specialist in the UK Constitution, and I'm not expecting you to be as immersed in the American Constitution. Nonetheless, the one takes its inspiration from the other.
Oh, completely.
And the US Constitution is being torn apart.
Yeah,
has been torn apart by these collectivist forces as well.
Oh, completely. And interestingly, actually, the American Constitution is much more supported, and much. I suppose there's a greater perception in America of their own constitution. I think their constitution is more vulnerable, actually, interestingly, and some people will raise an eyebrow at my comments on that. I think the American constitution, whilst it's more prevalent, is a little more vulnerable because it's a little bit more prescriptive. And actually, in a way, the more prescriptive and complex your constitution is on paper, the more brittle and possibly the weaker it is as well. There are some concerns. There's a sort of understanding and a knowledge, for example, of jury nullification, interestingly, over in America. But rarely do people link that to the Constitution. You don't hear Americans talking about, oh, yeah, the central pillar of our Constitution in America is actually authentic trial by jury, where the jury has the power and the right to judge on the law itself. Rarely do you hear that. It's a very occulted concept. And yet over here, the English Constitution, which is the basis of the British Constitution, in some ways is more powerful because it's simpler. It's really about principles. It's about those basic underlying customary principles that are held in the 1215 Magna Carta. And which is always claimed to be not written, interestingly. I was always amused by that, But actually, the simpler in some ways, and the more principle-based your constitution is, and as long as it places the people in authority over their own government using a mechanism like that, you've got a constitution that's worth having. If you don't talk about that, or you don't have that in your constitution, then you've got a bigger problem. It still doesn't mean necessarily that it's not right, and it's built into natural law. Every country in the world should understand natural justice, and it just might mean that some countries have got a bit further to go. Interestingly, though, actually, I was particularly interested in Argentina and what was going on there recently, because there's a particularly interesting case with Milei, isn't it? The economist who understands Austrian economics, which is on the economic side of things the equivalent of the individualist ideals. The idea that government should mess with economics as little, or the economy as little as possible, as little tweaking from the centre as you possibly can. In fact, no tweaking from the centre at all, because they don't have the authority to do so. So yeah, you're right. We're seeing an absolutely blowing up of populist thinking, which is always looked down upon by those in the establishment. Why? Because they're collectivists. And this is what people need to spot. This is where, look at the expressions of the collectivists and what they're trying to do. Yeah, as soon as they're trying to socially organise or take the high ground on this and say, well, you don't really know how to do this, so you don't have the moral authority to do that. So yeah, absolutely.
Isn't it interesting? I find it profoundly interesting. You talk about the complexity and how the simpler and the less rigid and the less written down a constitution is, then the better it is. But it also requires a lot more grown up behaviour.
Yes.
I think about how if you say the Ten Commandments. Now, I know that Moses did not actually invent the Ten Commandments, that he was working on basically natural law at that point. And how simple, in essence, the Ten Commandments are.
Yeah.
10 instructions. You don't steal, don't kill, don't lie, whatever.
Right. Don't harm another.
And then what happened? And then what happened with, that's the basis of all that is in the Torah. And then within the Talmud, which is all these workarounds that were added on, pages and pages and pages of commentary and commentary on commentary, until you get to the point where those with a will to do so work their way around the basic law. On the one hand, you say, don't kill, but then they find ways in which they can make it legal to kill.
Totally right.
And they say, don't steal.
Yeah,
we all know what that means. But then eventually you end up with whatever, personal income tax.
Yes,
which is a form of theft.
No, absolutely.
They're all workarounds.
Yeah, there was a very interesting observation made by a judge in America, Judge Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., I think it was, who described what he called the bad man concept. Now he was a collectivist, so he didn't really understand the profound nature of what he was actually saying. But the bad man concept is this idea that he expressed, actually, perhaps by mistake, that legislation actually provides the bad man the opportunity to get around the law by spotting how he can deal with that. Yeah, but it's the moral man that actually prefers justice to be established through intent, so through conscience. So that's quite an interesting concept, just to illustrate what you were talking about there.
I suppose you inevitably come around to thinking that a lot of it has to do with the difference between being a parent or a child.
Yes.
I think it's natural for anyone from 9 months to 99 years old to want to be taken care of. In some ways, you never get beyond wanting mum and dad to make it right.
Yeah.
But that susceptibility to being told what to do leads eventually to a willingness to submit to collectivism.
Absolutely spot on.
And you've almost got to run against that and become. There has to come a point where you just accept that you are mum and dad, that no one should be or even could be coming to help.
Yeah. Yes, you are expressing exactly the concept of self-mastery. Yeah, so that is what an individualist or a voluntarist fundamentally believes, that it's my responsibility to be my own governor. I need to be able to govern myself. Self-governance. I'm running a course at the moment called Self-Governance, Earning Our Freedom. You don't earn your freedom until you start learning to govern yourself. And nobody's suggesting for a moment that we all know how to do that immediately, just as soon as we've spotted that we're not properly at the moment. We have to practice doing that. And the practicing of doing that, that's one of the wonderful things about, and I keep going back to trial by jury, but trial by jury has within it this sort of sense of alchemy and raising of consciousness. It actually brings about a greater regard for involvement in civic affairs and taking that responsibility. There's a lovely quotation, actually, I should just read to you, by Trevor Grove, who did some good writing on this, where he was talking about the jury. We had become professionalised. They say the office helps to make the man. Even within the much briefer compass of most trials, jury membership does seem to summon up people's civic mindedness, perhaps for the first and only time in their lives. Although this is a cynical age, honesty, fairness, and justice are concepts nearly everyone believes in, even if they do not personally live up to them. It's just lovely, isn't it? I mean, it's just summing up this whole idea that actually It's about our conscience. We have to call things out. We have to judge, but we need to do it with compassion. And the best framework in which to do that is the very original trial by jury that was in place by our Constitution. That's why it's the template for this, because it's all there for us. It's just hidden away in those dusty corners, as you said, Neil. You know, we just need to refind it, dust it off, and just think and get passionate about it again, and discover, blimey, this is actually what we need all along. You know.
That's so right. I think it's suddenly by an incremental process. Talking to you and to some others, it has occurred to me that one of the ways in which what we need to know has been occulted, as you say, or hidden away, is so many things we've been encouraged to think are boring and outmoded, and dusty. I think was a word you just used.
Yeah,
and then I've begun to think, what is it that they've sprinkled the dust over so that we don't pay any attention anymore? And when I raise the subject of constitution with people or trial by jury, you can see people just glazing over,
right,
and thinking, who is this guy, and why is he bringing this stuff up? And the analogy I would make is, it's easy to watch a 60-second TikTok video. Or as children, we all enjoyed cartoons and so on. But then in that, when I became a man, I put away childish things. When you finally discover, I don't know, Moby Dick, Herman Melville, great American novel, and it's difficult. It's a really difficult thing to read. Well, I would imagine it is for most people.
Yeah.
But then you realise, actually, I have to be, as an individual, the driving motive force of Moby Dick. Moby Dick's not going to do it for me.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be able to just lie back and have Moby Dick happen to me.
No.
I have to make it, I have to turn it from dry pages into a living document of what it is to be alive on the ocean and confronting the Leviathan.
Yes.
But if you do put in the effort, then you think, oh my God, that's why... Well, in this instance, Moby Dick is an immortal piece of work.
Yes,
because it demands of you.
I think you're completely right, and what I think you're getting to here is the story. Is this idea that the real truth in something is not really held in the sort of breakdown of the simple facts that are contained within what you might see as that truth. Yeah, the truth really lies in the way that it's glued together in the narrative and the story and the feeling and the energy that's put behind it. And you can't really have that story behind, sort of crass categorization of legislation. You can't, you're automatically going to get a punishment if you just don't do this, Whereas actually, if you start to put the story behind trial by jury and how it's all about our conscience, and it's about teasing out, what are those prejudices and things that we all face, and the compassion that we actually have on a jury as well, understanding that we do have to judge this, but at the same time, we're all potential criminals. We're all imperfect, and so we're all in this together. So that's the nature, if you like, of being an individualist, which is separate from each other and having our own space, but at the same time, you only really come to understand how connected we are when you already have been an individualist, when you regard and appreciate your separateness first. Yeah, being told to be the same as this, within this group, that you must do this, and they were all sort of homogenous as a group. There's no morality. There's no there's no quality behind that. Really. You have to take the individualist approach to be separate, and then you can appreciate the connectedness only afterwards. When you start to understand the compassion for the other, if you like, in that.
I still think about something that you said to me very early on when we started having our conversations about all of this some years ago, that it was often the case for people who had a one-time opportunity or commandment to serve on a jury.
Yes.
And that maybe however reluctantly or hesitantly they took on that yoke, so many people came out of the process having had a Damascene conversion almost, and came away from it thinking that it was the one of the most profoundly affecting and moving experiences of their lives. And I remember thinking that the culture that we're in is of people going to great lengths to avoid jury duty.
Yeah.
There's probably an app you can download from the internet now that, in the event of being summoned to jury duty, here's how you get out of it.
How do you get out of it? Yeah, exactly.
That we've been encouraged to think that, being on a jury would be the worst, the most boring thing. And you think, to what extent is that deliberate, that we've been raised to think that, jury duty, spare me?
Yeah.
But because when you said that to me, that people sometimes come out, they couldn't get out of it and they ended up on a jury, and they came away from the experience changed forever.
Yes.
Given a sense of civic significance.
Yes.
I thought there's something there. Which we're told is boring, it totally, really isn't.
But interestingly, as I was sort of hinting at last time when we were talking, it's a kind of gaslighting, because you've got parts of the establishment who actually love the jury, the concept of trial by jury, and the legal profession are very respectful of it and like it, and so does the judiciary. But actually, there's a kind of gaslighting going on that I was talking about, which is this discomfort, where they kind of don't want to go the whole way and to admit the fact that really there is no point in the jury unless you can admit to yourself and to the country generally that it's the jurors themselves that are the highest law council of the land. That's the whole point of it. It's meant to operate like that. And they can't quite bring themselves to admit that that's the case. And this kind of gaslighting is happening throughout even writings. You can see it's actually written down in various places. But actually, it's worth just quoting this one. I've got a few things here that are just worth mentioning here. But this was interesting because Friedman, who wrote an essay in 1989, he's really a commentary on the jury and popular culture, which is quite interesting. But have a listen to this. Guilt is individual, not collective, and so in a way is assessment of guilt. The jury is a collective body and it acts collectively, but the norms that govern it are norms that insist on treating each case and each defendant in the most profoundly individual way. Each juror brings his individual conscience to bear on the collective task of the jury. And that was somebody who actually speaks on popular culture, and that was the jury within popular culture.
It seems to me I kind of bubble under with the a sort of static electricity of excitement about something that I know is probably it's a long way off, but once you sort of stumble into this terrain, and if you then just begin to open up to it, when I now look out at what's happening, what we just discussed about what's happening across Europe and what's happening in the US, or the consequences of the way in which that constitution has been messed with.
Yes.
There's a breaking point has been reached. It feels as though something massive has been being tried and applied for a long time. Very diligently, very carefully, softly catch a monkey in that kind of Fabian society way about, moving at the speed of a tortoise,
yes.
Rather than the speed of a hare, to gradually creep up on people.
Yeah.
It's been tried, but it hasn't worked. And that we're in this uncomfortable, febrile period where some people have already realized that this is not good enough. And we can't keep going with what we have been experiencing and what we have been having applied upon us. So that static bubbling of excitement that I feel is the necessity for something better.
Yes.
And I feel inevitably, in a way that we all profoundly understand, you have to go back to the beginnings to remind yourself of how it might have been better and how it might yet be better, by really a kind of a renaissance of simpler understandings of what it is to be human and alive.
Yes, and clearing the complexities of our own shadow, because that's in a way what it is that's caused our confusion. It's our own stuff in a way that's caused us to become manipulated and not see that simplicity that you're talking about, I think. And in a sense, what we're actually seeing is an evolution. It's an evolutionary thing. One might be tempted to think, well, why hasn't this happened before? And it sort of has at various points. The 1215 Magna Carta was a key moment in that. And it's quite interesting, looking at the 2 years that led up to the 1215 Magna Carta, and Stephen Langton, the Archbishop, who was somebody who very, very much understood natural justice and the sort of the inevitability of it, that it can't really operate any other way, which is what we were talking about last time. So these ideas, these concepts have existed for quite a long time. Is 1215 a long time? Not in the big scheme of things, I suppose. But, we have had these moments where we've got very close to this, but actually, yes, you're right. I think there is a prevailing emergence of that deeper understanding and that deeper truth, that people are starting to realize that, it's not good enough just simply to be following orders, which is what you're doing when you're legislating within a society, and having that sort of party political system. It's just not good enough. It's not a good enough solution. And we're absolutely sick and tired of people who push that as well, collectivists. And they need to be, metaphorically slapped about the face, and we need to get them to wake up. And the way that we do that is that we have to wake up ourselves to some extent as well, because what we have to do is to practice understanding those base principles, those underlying principles, because it's very easy to become trapped and to get confused. As you said last time, call for a referendum, which sounds very fair, but actually isn't that an interesting trap that we all fall into? And I did too at one point as well. These are the sorts of things that we kind of reach for, when in actual fact, we've got to, clean out our thinking and become reasoned and understanding and a bit more grown up, I think, and take that responsibility for the way that we're thinking. Maybe take a look at the trivium learning method, for example, and understanding, how we can be caught out in our logical thinking, for example. So it's a hard grind. We have to do it. But, if we really start on that journey, I don't think it would actually take that long for us to start to see some positive change. I'm not suggesting for a moment that we're going to get our utopian society anytime tomorrow, or even in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. It might be hundreds of years before things really turn around to the extent that we want it. But there's no reason why we couldn't really make a massive difference, literally within the next 5 or 10 years, if sufficient numbers really started to take responsibility for these ideas, these concepts that we're talking about right now, and take an interest in it, get useful on social media, start posting all sorts of provocative statements and contradictory ideas that cause people to spot those contradictions and those conflicts in their thinking. Because that's the way it's done. You change people's ideas by language. You change them by dialogue. That's how it's done. Not just by delivering notices onto the desks of public servants at the moment, because they won't understand it. You do it by narrative, changing narrative. So absolutely.
People ask me, and I ask myself and other people, when all this began to happen, 3-4 years ago, COVID and all the rest of it, and all the unlikely disparate characters that seemed to see the same problem from myriad different directions and viewpoints. The people with whom I found myself in the lifeboat, so to speak, were all sorts.
Yes.
Young, old, male,
yes.
Female, creeds, religions, colours, politics and all the rest of it. And you would look around and go, what is the unifying characteristic here that we all have in common, that we've all just sort of understood there's something wrong? We don't know what it is, but we don't like the smell. And when I listen to you, and as I've thought about it year in, I'm reminded, believe it or not, of the old grey whistle test, that TV show that showcased new music. Now, the old grey whistle test was a reference to a kind of a joke I don't know, within a big corporate that was in the business of making music or commissioning music. And to pass the old grey whistle test, a new tune had to be heard being whistled by the old greys, which was a sort of pejorative term for the tea ladies. The guys sitting on the security desk, the people pushing mops about the floor were called the old greys.
Interesting, yeah.
And if the tune stuck with them that they could whistle it, then a tune was deemed to have passed the old grey whistle test.
Yes.
And I think that what's happening for some of us, and I think hopefully more and more of us, is we're all recognising the tune.
I hope so.
It's
I
sticking.
think you're right. It's a really good analogy. I like it. And actually, that's what I'm trying to do, I suppose, is to facilitate the presenting of these, what might at first seem complex concepts, but doing it in the way so that people have got some handles to grab hold of, so that there is a... suddenly people can see the wood from the trees on this one. And I think you're absolutely right. We're kind of nearly there, I think. But if people can start to see those underlying foundational principles, those tests for where they get caught out, suddenly everything starts to become clear. You can start to see, for example, that the two ends of the political spectrum are actually the same, and they're both collectivist in nature, and the belief in the authority of government is a huge problem for us in society. These are the sorts of things that, and once you present them in small, quick lines like that, people can then start to consume them, and then hopefully maybe even re-express them themselves, because it's only through the re-expression of those ideas that people have really grasped them, I think. But it's quite complex, but I think that if we can get them down to those little pithy ideas that really cause clarity and the light bulb to come on in people's heads, wow, then we're making some progress, I think, at that point. Yeah.
I think there's something really quite joyous about it, in amongst all the agony of it, and appreciating the enormity of whatever the challenge that lies before us.
Yeah.
But it's like acquiring a simple trick in a way. I remember when I first accidentally got into making documentary television, or presenting documentary television 20 odd years ago now. On the first sort of shoot that I was ever on, the first cameraman that I ever worked with said to me in a tea break, "You do realise that now that you've done this, you'll never be able to watch television the same way again, because you've seen it from the other side of the mirror."
Yeah.
He said, you might still enjoy television, and sure enough, as the process went on, I found that when I went home and I was watching a documentary, I would be saying to my wife, "Oh, do you know what they did there? Did you see you do realise what happened there?" Because I had been shown the mechanics of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And be like if you've only ever watched a magician or a close-up conjurer, you get tricked every time. But if he shows you what he's doing, the next time he performs the trick, you think, "I can't believe I was taken in by that. Why did I not see that?" So once you start getting into some of this, although it's simultaneously agonizing when you see the deceit or the conceit, there is a kind of a joy in, like, when this general election came around, or whenever the next big sort of false flag comes along, you think, "I can't believe I ever got taken in by this kind of thing."
Yeah.
So it's a small mercy, but it's undoubtedly a mercy when you start to see how it works.
I think it is, and on the grandest scale, Neil, these crises that are thrown our way, when you're looking at it from that higher perspective, really, in a way, they are learning opportunities for us. You could say that the whole COVID experience is one massive, great learning opportunity for all of us. Whichever side you were on, whatever your understanding of it was. That there are some moral learning opportunities from that, and all sorts of other things that have happened. And the thing is that if we don't learn from those opportunities, then those situations are going to become more intense. It's kind of like the universe is kind of ratcheting up things, really, for us. You're not getting this, guys, so we're just going to keep giving you these experiences so that you can learn from them. So in that regard, in that grandest scale, it's quite exciting and quite positive, because actually that is a demonstration of the divine, the universe, actually saying, you have to learn from this. You're going to have to grow up and start taking responsibility here, in the wild place of the universe that it is. And it's only at that point that I'm going to allow you to sort of, the phrase that I often put out is, move to the top table of enlightenment. You've got to earn it. Yeah. And I think that's what it is. It's about learning those lessons and taking those crises for what they really are, which is, opportunities for learning. Simple as that.
What's happening to me is I've come to a feeling that we have simultaneously been oversold a misconception of happiness.
Yes.
And that struggle and sadness, whatever, gets a bad rap. And that actually, what I suspect when you talk about what the universe wants, I think the universe needs us to accept that being saddened, being challenged, feeling under the cosh is actually a desirable state of being.
Completely right.
Because it's the difference between sobriety and being drunk.
Yep.
Happy is a bit like being a bit drunk, which is excellent. But you don't want to be, you can't really function if you're drunk all the time. And the hard bit, the difficulty, the not understanding, the confusion, the sadness, the anger, all of these things are more like the sobriety, because it's when you're in that place,
yes,
that you have to learn. You have to get up and get on, and that's how it's been for me. That we're told, we've been encouraged to think, well, if you feel a bit sad, go to the doctor and get a pill.
And suppress
it. No.
Yes.
No, actually embrace it.
Yes.
Embrace it for what it is, which is an opportunity to learn something.
Right, totally. Embrace it and find out what's at the heart of that and what's at the root of it. It's really about human shadow work. It is the key to it. You're absolutely right. It's and it's about being authentic. All parts of yourself are. That's the only way that you can be real. And we talked about that last time, about the authentic self. And I just couldn't recommend enough people starting to do some of this work. You've got to be careful, and I'm not going to sit here and say, because this is like the health thing. So I'm not a health professional, nor am I a legal professional here. So let's just put that out there for a moment. Nor am I a psychology professional either. But I would. It is something profoundly important and uplifting to start to look at that within yourself and you do it forever. This is it's never over doing shadow work. It's but that healing that we all need to do, that's what we're charged to do, I think, is to be authentic, to be the
don't you just love the fact that this is really the nub of it for me, that you say the word constitution and you mention a concept like trial by jury or the jury system, and it sounds like the greyest, dreariest stuff. But miraculously, it's through that overlooked door that you and me, each in our own way and in our own time, have stumbled into this thing that makes us talk to each other like in this way.
Yes.
You think, isn't that amazing? Oh. That which looked like a grey pebble on ready to be kicked into the long grass is actually the Koh-i-Noor diamond.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really what it's all about. People say to me, Will, you talk about the Constitution, and well, I do, but actually, the real gold is the stuff that's underneath it. That's where is the ultimate healing and the raising of consciousness and the evolution of humanity. I just talk about the Constitution because I've spotted the fact that it got it right, and that it's actually a very useful template for us to get there. We just have to embrace it and to hold it here and to care enough about it. And it's going to be the quickest way, easiest way of dealing with it, because it was already set up and it's structured within our system of law. So why would you not use it? But actually, yes, the real gold is the stuff that we've been talking about underneath. Yeah, that's where we're trying to get to.
Well, Keyte, there in your last sentences there, the gold underneath, healing and evolution. That's going to be the three thoughts that I'll take away from this. Once again, Will, what a wonderful opportunity I've had. I hope you've enjoyed it too. We will do it again, but for now, today, Will, 1,000 thanks.
Thank you very much, Neil. It's been fantastic.